obligation to stand for and with other marginalized communities who both are intersected in our group and outside. And it's that power of that responsibility that we're going to launch this next hour discussion around. So that's number one. And number two is to think about, none of us are made up of any singular identity. None of us are made up of any singular identity. So my pronouns are he, him, his. I self-identify as a white, gay, cisgendered, able-bodied male. For those of you who may only be able to hear the audio, or if you're using closed caption, I am a gray-haired, slightly losing that gray hair, but a really long COVID beard going on right now as well. So hopefully that helps. But we're made up of all sorts of identities. And what we're going to do, we've invited 4 panelists who are going to help us talk about this topic. So I'm going to introduce you to each of them here. I'm going to give a quick take of their bio and ask each of them a short question. And it's really, why are you even involved in your EBRG today? It's the only time I'm going to ask all of you the same question. So first, Terry Kittle, who's a senior manager of digital engagement at Verizon Communications and member of Verizon's LGBTQ BRG. Terry, why are you involved in your BRG at Verizon?
Thank you for the introduction. I'm involved because along the way in my life path, I feel like I kind of lost my voice, and this was a way to bring my voice forward and represent our community and be more actively engaged in what is happening societally and in our community.
Terry, thank you for that. So making an impact and regaining your voice, powerful. Sarah Fox, Associate Manager, Indirect Procurement at US Foods and member of US Foods LGBTQ BRG. Sarah, why are you involved?
Thanks, Scott. A lot of really what Terry said was in some of your identity, but I think also having past jobs where there wasn't an opportunity to get aligned with other people like you and like-minded people and find some mentorship there.
Excellent. Find mentorship, make connections with like-minded or similar identity experiences in our organizations. One of the powerful drivers for involvement in BRGs. Andrew Thierbach, so human resources business partner, Andrew, trading and shipping at Americas at BP. He leads the BP's PRIDE BRG. Andrew, welcome. And why are you involved in your BRG?
Thanks, Scott. There's a couple main reasons. I think the main reason is really around just with me just being very early on in my career, stepping into what I would consider more typical a conservative industry and environment. Just really trying to challenge the status quo and really trying to progress. And I think being a lead in the Pride space really helps me, one, kind of share my own kind of identity and sexual orientation, but also trying to progress with other people to within our community as well.
Absolutely. And Andrew, thank you. I'm seeing a note here. Let's make sure we operate with diversity, equity, and inclusion best practices and also share our pronouns. Andrew, your pronouns, please.
He, him, his.
All right. Sarah.
She, her.
And Terry.
He, him, his.
Thank you. And so our fourth panelist to round out this discussion, Bernadette Smith, who is the CEO at the Equality Institute, author, keynote speaker, fellow Crane's notable LGBTQ executive as well. Bernadette, always a pleasure to work with you. Why are you involved in this work and activity?
Because I feel like I was put on this earth to change the world. And because I think it's really important to give back and to help change hearts and minds. I can't imagine doing anything else. I absolutely love facilitating idea sharing, teaching, training. Like it gets me so excited.
Thank you. So the opportunity to fulfill the reason you're on this planet. No small goal there. And your pronouns, Bernadette.
My pronouns are she, her.
All right, thank you so very much. And let's start, Sarah, with you with this first question to throw your way, if we may. 2020 has brought on a lot of changes for us, and we're going to unpack some of those, not only in this session, but in the next one that I mentioned as well. But when you think about intersectionality and how your BRG has partnered with other BRG leaders and groups in your organization, how is that different in 2020 than maybe it was in years past?
So quite a few things probably different right now. The big one is we're all virtual for at least US Foods for the most part. With that being said, I think early on in 2020 and COVID, it was a bit of a struggle to kind of get the momentum going. And then suddenly we kind of had an unlock moment of, wait, we're all virtual, so we can now tap into other individuals in our organization that might want to enjoy the events that we put on. So our organization has 2 corporate offices, one in Rosemont and one in Tempe. And a lot of our events were really housed there physically in the building. And really the move to going virtual meant now we were open up to all of our distribution centers across the United States, which then allowed associates in each one of those facilities to be able to jump on different events, participate. And then we also started very quickly integrating the record function of Zooms, of Teams, and all of that. So then not only could we reach who was currently in the event, but also anyone that could not attend the event had the ability to go back, watch the video of it, and participate. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback with that.
So in one of the ways intersectionality, I'm hearing, Sarah, for your group has played a key role is a very broad definition of intersectionality, meaning the geography and reach that you now have with your BRG because we are so virtual. And so I think that's a key distinction and something that hopefully others are hearing and can take account. Our limitations of our physical touch, if you will, of BRG activities and events has changed significantly, and we can outreach even further. So Andrew, if I bounce to you for this question around your BRG, specifically, let's turn to the events of late May and the murder of Mr. George Floyd, where the whole world began watching and paying attention to issues around racial injustice in ways that have been there for well over 400 years, but raised to a level of consciousness in this country that we've not seen before. How did those events impact your BRG activities and how you all were thinking about intersectionality, in particular, getting ready to go right into Pride Month?
Right. Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of us can really empathize with those events and the Black Lives Matter movement. And, you know, I think historically we were really good at taking a moment and really capturing that moment. So like Pride Month, you know, in June, it's like, you know, the BRG just suddenly becomes very popular and things like that. And then afterwards, it's like, well, what kind of happens beyond Pride? So, you know, specifically to, you know, our African-American BRG that we have here, it was really trying to take that moment just beyond just the BRG population and taking that moment for a company as a whole. And I think that was what really kind of changed the way that we've kind of historically had those types of sessions, is that everyone was paying attention. Everyone was taking a moment to really open up and continue the conversation within the company. And it didn't just stop at that one moment. It's actually progressed into several, you know, key changing things that we're doing here at BP, including developing a African-American diversity leadership program specifically for those within the African-American community. And, you know, being the Pride leader here in Chicago, it's really important to obviously make sure that we're representing for our Black LGBT plus community as well. And, you know, during those events, it was teaming up with our African American BRG to just make sure that they had good representation and that we were really trying to promote and advertise that the best that we could. So I know that doesn't, you know, that's kind of the kind of ending moment for what that was, but there's a lot of momentum as it comes from that.
I think it's a great example of how we have an opportunity as EBRG leaders, and I'll try to use that acronym throughout, EBRG leaders, depending on what label or acronym you use in your organization, for us to think about how we coalesce together as a leadership team across BRGs and stand for and with one another. And I think, Andrew, you just gave us a really concrete example of, yes, it may be a Black or African American employee leadership development program, but your intersection into that program can be, how are we feeding Black LGBTQ representation there? How are we supporting the broader program and driving our marketing and messaging even through our BRG? So I think it's a wonderful example to share in that regard. Terry, for you, you talked a lot about some of the work that you all were doing getting ready for Pride and the Pride Parade and how that had to pivot. And for many of us, I know there was a scramble, right? You know, the end of March hits, the world as we know it shifted. We thought we were just beginning to understand that landscape. And as we've just talked about, the end of June hits. And another end of May hits, and then another shift happens, rather. How did that impact how you approached your Pride activities in June, and how you were able to expand your outreach for that to bring in additional intersectional members as well?
Sure, great question, thank you. So for us, we, didn't want to have a Pride Month without having a Pride celebration. There's history in the Pride walks and what it means. So we were able to actually conduct a virtual Pride walk. It was an hour long. We were able to expand to a greater audience. So for here, being the Chicago chapter of our ERG at Verizon, we're limited to geography and who we can include within our Pride March, as well as, because the Pride Parade is so large in Chicago, it's limited to how many people you can have represent your company, because you have to keep it under control and keep the size contained. So we're limited to 100 individuals. So by doing the virtual Pride Walk, where we actually sent out the invite, you could actually do it on your phone, be on camera, see each other walking, bring your partner, your pets, your family, your kids. On the walk, it was done during our business hours. We actually were able to take that time, do the walk for an hour, and we were able to reach more people across the entire United States for Verizon at many levels of leadership. We had of our vice president of consumer operations on the walk, and directors, and several other individuals who normally wouldn't be able to participate in the event. And at times, because people could come and go on that event, the virtual event, could sign in and sign out, we probably had upwards of over 250 people participate.
So again, that expansion opportunity for more employees outside of the geography. And Bernadette, I'm going to set this question up for you, and I want to thank one of our members in the audience who kind of teed us up for this question that's coming next for you already. So thank you, Allie, for that, because it's an important one. The term intersectionality originates from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an American lawyer and really did some amazing groundbreaking work, particularly in the areas of the intersection of marginalized identities, race, and gender. And for Dr. Crenshaw, in the early work around intersectionality, it really was for, as she spoke about it, being a Black female, having a markedly different experience than either her Black male counterparts or white female counterparts. And that was the origins of it. of the term. And I think that's important that we not forget where that term and where this notion of intersectionality, the origins of it were, and pay homage to that. But the reality is, since then, we've expanded the definition of intersectionality to include multiple areas of our marginalized identities, LGBTQ being one of them. But here we are in an intersectionality panel, and as Ali so clearly pointed out, and I did ask all the panelists, we all self-identify as white. And yet we're doing an intersectionality panel. So Bernadette, I'm wondering if you can help us lean into that and the importance of white allies leading intersectionality conversations, as well as making room and space for our Black colleagues to share the same. I know you have some thoughts on that topic.
Thank you, Scott. It's an important question, and Ali, I appreciate your question as well. Sort of the elephant in the room, right? So I'm glad we're talking about it. Honestly, the way I see it from a personal level is that I have unearned advantages simply because of the color of my skin. And that gives me a leg up. It gives me opportunities and a little more access and more resources. And I will never know what it's like to have the lived experience of any person of color. But I realize what's important to me, and one of the things that I talk a lot about when I'm working with clients, is we have a responsibility to pay it forward and also pay it back. As LGBTQ folks, Scott said this on our prep call, yeah, we have benefited from allies who helped us win the fight for marriage equality, who've taken cases to the Supreme Court, like the case that recently extended federal employment protections to LGBTQ folks. We have amazing allies who have supported us every step of the way, and we owe other people our own allyship. It's incredibly important to use our own privileges, our own advantages to support others and to amplify the voices who don't often get heard. So one of the things I talk about, or I challenge people, is what are you doing to support Black trans women? Because they are among the most marginalized people of any community, right? And in the Americas, their life expectancy is like mid-30s, right? It's absolutely horrible. But they are part of our community. And how can we support them? How can we support people who are different from us regardless? Because it's our responsibility to give back.
I think so well said, and thank you for drawing our attention to some of the statistics and areas of deep concern for our Black trans colleagues, because the numbers are not positive. And I'm going to go just a step further. And Jeremy, you know this. I know you're not on the panel, but we had a lot of discussion about the makeup of this group. And the thing that got me over the hump, because I was almost ready to say, I'm out, or we'll switch moderators or something. We need to make a shift. Here's what turned the corner for me on this topic, for this session, for this hour discussion, is I think we need to do a better job in the LGBTQ white community being comfortable and clear and lean into the intersection of race discussions. I think we need to understand, as LGBTQ leaders, the power of our privilege, and all of the safe spaces that we may enjoy aren't necessarily safe spaces that everyone in our community can enjoy, particularly our members of our communities of color. And so for me, what we're trying to demonstrate here is, yes, LGBTQ leadership has historically been and predominantly been white, gay, male dominated. And I hope no one is offended by me naming that. That's my observation as a 50-year-old gay dude. I think the LGBT construct if you will, for many of us, revolves around the white gay experience. And the way that that's going to change and we can be more inclusive is if more white people and white gay men in particular are exposed to conversations like this, to understand what our privilege and the impact it can have on us. So that's my soapbox there for a minute.
Can I chime in one more thing on that?
Yeah, please.
Sort of related to the ERGs. One thing that I was really impressed by this past June was the ERGs that I was working with all really cared about making sure that the conversation I was doing, like LGBTQ one-on-one, 101 type trainings, workshops, allyship workshops, they all wanted to make sure that I was approaching the workshop from a lens of diversity within the community and making sure that I included and amplified some of the voices of folks who have gotten us to this place. Fortunately, I had already done that, but I'm glad that, I was being checked. I'm glad, because it's really, really important that we tell stories of folks like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and other folks who have really helped us get this far.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bernadette. I'm going to open this question up to our three members of BRGs on the corporate side. How do you think about representation in your leadership ranks of your BRG? How are you thinking about representation in your leadership ranks of your BRG? And I ask that because I think many of us, we're good at pointing out the representation at the top of our houses in the our corporate environments, but how are we looking, or you looking critically at representation in the BRG leadership ranks? Anyone have any thoughts there?
I'm happy to chime in and go first here. Yeah, I think, just based on the points that were just said, I think we do have male and female representation. I think they're predominantly white in terms of the, the kind of racial makeup that we have. But I think a lot of the push and development for leadership specifically is really trying to get more exposure and education around certain things. And I know, Scott, when we had our kind of prep meeting, I talked about the fact that we were working a lot around bisexuality awareness and really working around how do we as a community, as an LGBT plus community, become more educated and aware around bisexuality. And same with transgender inclusion, picking up things and having more sessions and talking about that specifically. And I think that those are small steps in that direction, and to trying to kind of build and foster that with our ERG leadership. But those are the things that we're taking right now to kind of funnel that and start that kind of process.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Any other thoughts on how you're looking at your BRG leadership and representation, not only race, but other, Andrew, you mentioned other dimensions of and within the LGBTQ community. So we often see that many BRGs are led by a really kind of certain demographic profile. And so how are you expanding those and challenging yourselves? Sarah, I think you had some examples there as well, if we can go to you.
Yeah, certainly. So when we first kicked off our ERGs, one of our vice president at the time had left the company, and myself and the president are two white women, and we both kind of looked at each other like, okay, we need to make this reflect other people within the membership group. Certainly our membership group is not all white women who identify as gay or queer. And then we're able to expand. So when we were looking at new people to add in, it was two men, one out of our Tempe office who identifies as Latino, to have a different representation. And now we're looking for another position, and everyone that applied for that position just happens to also be an ally. So that was also an area we did not have. And certainly, kind of what you've spoken about already, Scott, of how important our allies are, and especially in the workplace. So having that voice on our leadership team, I think is also an important piece to success and just what we're doing as a EBRG.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah, for that. Roxanne, let's go to you. I think you've got a question.
Yes, we do. Thank you all. And thank you to all the panelists so far. I just kind of want to tease out a little bit more about the question before regarding intersectionality and kind of the makeup of the panelists. As someone who is a Jewish, Latinx, gender fluid woman, I'd like to hear more about why you all chose white allies to be on the panel rather than having some additional racial representation.
So I believe the panelists there was a broad call for panelists from the Chamber BRG membership ranks. And Jeremy, you and I had some detailed conversations about the makeup of the panel. And it was something that we talked about directly as prep for this. What I can say is the preference by far, I think, would have been for us to be able to demonstrate a racially diverse panel. And the reality for today, for the availability from the membership who were hand raisers who said, yes, I'd like to participate, are the panelists that we see today. And so how can we leverage that situation and not avoid or shy away from the importance of the intersectionality conversation and the experiences of our colleagues of color? So that, I think, is the path forward. And I see a question here, is a LGBTQ plus intersectionality path forward only having white allies on discussing intersectionality? No. But I don't know that that should stop us from having an intersectionality conversation either. So that, I think we need to find ways, from my view, to partner more effectively, and particularly as white colleagues, find ways to address intersectionality much more overtly than many of us have ever thought about before. Anything to add, panelists, on that? And maybe even Jeremy as well, thinking through this. Bernadette, anything that you would add?
One thing I'll say is that I know some ERGs during their Pride programming, whatever it happened to be, I know that many of them provided ally tips for how to be a better ally or advocate for your Black colleagues and the Black community at large. And so it became, I guess, I would say more embedded than in the past. I think that the conversation about diversity of panelists is a conversation we're having this year, but we weren't having last year. And so it's all a work in progress. And I'm just really glad we are having these conversations. And these are great questions, but it's imperfect right now.
And I think it shows some of the kind of systemic and institutional racism, I'll go that far, quite frankly, that exists within our community, that we must collectively work at tackling. And that's tackling together, but there's responsibility to do so. So great. Roxanne?
Follow-up question. Yes, I have a follow-up question, and I hope I capture this correctly as well. If you're seeing a lack of intersectionality, how are you critically engaging in how your EBRG basically pipelines new talent that is more diverse or more intersectional? How are you critically reacting, and what changes are you making to the future so that you can have those voices speak instead of speaking for them?
Great question. Love that. Anyone have some thoughts there that they want to respond to? Great, deep question.
Yeah, I can respond to that one. For us, it's really doing I think just a stronger, keen eye at, what we're doing in terms of events, how we're participating, and running co-events with other ERGs. If we just kind of stay siloed within our PRIDE ERG, that's just where we stay naturally. But when we start looking at how can I work with our Black and African American ERG, how can we put on events and join up together, that then opens up just the availability of members and who can join. And also, I think, shows to members of other ERGs that we're not siloed within our own. And there is a lot of different paths that we cross across the board. So that's been one challenge that we've really taken on, especially with the virtual aspect, and coming together with our other ERG groups, hearing and listening what they would like to see, not just saying, hey, this is our agenda, this is what we want to do, but instead ask the question, what do you want to see from us? And then you really have, I think, a better playing field of how you can approach all BRGs and all people that fit into, every bucket across the board. Because as you said before, not one person identifies as one. There's some part of us across the board and different ERGs. And so I would say that would be a big piece for US Foods Pride Group.
It's great. Thank you, Sarah. And I think this gets to, when we think about the, even our work at the chamber, the work at the larger Chicagoland community, the LGBTQ community, and something that I'm happy to draw attention to, it can feel like there's a divide. Not only are we, doing things as an overall community, raising our awareness, the shift of the name of Boys Town being one of them, that's a really concrete example that's happening because of our collective awareness raising. But the number of members of our community who cannot imagine themselves coming up to Halstead and that corridor and participating and feeling safe, and that they are recognized and heard by the music that's played, by the people who are frequenting those establishments when we used to be able to actually get together in person. These are conversations we have to start having. And for those of us who may identify as white and are comfortable in those environments, what have we done to go to the South Side and experience some of the LGBTQ events that are south of Roosevelt, as an example, are ways that we can begin building bridges, I think, with one another across this community. I often, when I'm speaking with straight audiences, cisgender straight audiences, there's one of the myths they often have is that the LGBTQ community is this one big interlocked, happy and lockstep family. Well, now take our challenges that we've had with the L's, the G's, the B's, the T's, the I's, the A's, the Q's, which we have, now overlay race. Now overlay on top of that disability. Now overlay on top of that veteran or military status. We now have the stacked effect of marginalized, oppressed groups that we have not had, in my experience, had those open conversations within this community. We've gotten stuck at just our dimension of difference, and now is the time for us to raise to a different level of conversation there. So I thank you for those questions. And panelists, I know some of that is not what we had planned at all, but thank you, because that's exactly the conversation we should be having, particularly leading this conversation.
I have, Scott, I have one more question if we have time.
Of course, bring it on, Roxanne.
Okay, great. If there were BIPOC folks asked to be on this panel and none of them volunteered to participate, it may show that they do not feel safe or valued enough to speak up. I would also personally add that, I would be curious to hear if they were a first thought or a last thought. Can we as BERG leaders do to improve this?
Sounds like a question for Jeremy.
Yeah, Jeremy, I know, are you able to go on video or off mic? I don't know if Roxanne, do you?
Let's see. Jeremy, are you there? He may have stepped away for a moment.
Yeah, okay. What I can tell you is it was a first outreach. So it wasn't an afterthought. I feel very confident in that process in terms of the open-ended panel. And I will tell you, I'm just going to be transparent how this played out for real. So when we got the inQuest team, got this notice of the 4 panelists, we said, wait a minute, what do we need to be doing? This, thank you. We're glad that we've got these 4 hand raisers. Jeremy, can you go back? And we actually, Jeremy and I communicated very specifically outreach. And there was an availability issue, and I can't speak to other motivations on why people declined. On the inQuest side, we reached out to our network as well, to our Chicagoland companies and BRG leaders for an additional kind of saying, hey, here's this opportunity. Again, can't speak to the reasons why. Didn't go out and do a survey. Why did you decline to participate? Don't have that knowledge. And then a couple of other things that we thought about. We thought, oh, do we add Jeremy? Well, thought that was a possibility. Jeremy and I, we talked about that overtly and discreetly. Said no, that feels a little inauthentic and probably not the way to go. We also really strongly considered pulling me out of this and inserting one of my colleagues of color as the moderator. The only member of color that I have on my team isn't a member of the LGBTQ community. Now, we have members of color of the LGBT community. The available member was not a member of that community. And so when we approached them, the answer was, I'm not completely comfortable leading that discussion. So those were some of the steps. Again, I go back to Bernadette, your comment of this is imperfect. If any of us are thinking that we're going to be, that perfection is where we are at this stage, I think imperfect and calling on it and having conversations like this is the desire. I know I will challenge, thank you to this conversation, I will challenge even harder the next time because all of the senses and my triggers were I think spot on, and we'll attempt to do better.
I appreciate
One
the
thing-
response, Scott. Oh yes, Bernadette.
Can I just add that I've been involved with the chamber here in Chicago for 3 or 4 years now, and Jeremy is awesome. And what we've done, what he's done, what the chamber has done for the past few years is incredible. I've sat on a number of panels, all of which have been diverse. So really based on my experience, I can just say from my perspective, this is the exception, not the rule. And I hope that folks feel safe with the chamber because I think they've done a great job.
Bernadette, that's a wonderful segue because the next question for you is what can we do to make our spaces more safe, a safe space?
Who would like to take that? What can we do to make our spaces more safe for more people? Not just some of our community, some of the time. Thoughts, suggestions?
I think that we have to keep having these conversations and we have to keep being vulnerable about what we don't know and then educating ourselves and just using our words and letting folks know that we have their back and that we are trying to do better. Like I know that it's like I said before, it's imperfect, but we are working on it. And psychological safety really comes from vulnerability. And those of us who are in leadership positions, use your influence, whatever sphere of influence you have and whatever network you have, whether it's an organization you volunteer with or a church that you're part of or a committee that you're on, whatever influence you have, think about how you can use your influence and your leadership to be anti-racist, actively anti-racist, dismantling systems of racism which might mean expanding your network. It might mean reaching out to someone for coffee that you don't know before. Who are you hiring? Who are you doing business with? Those are ways that you can be actively anti-racist and actively expand your sphere of influence. And that's a great start. But it doesn't happen by accident, by the way. So you have to be really intentional about it.
And I'm going to build on that, Bernadette, because I think the power of looking at our own BRG leadership structures, and that question that was asked a moment ago about what are we all doing? We're here, we're a we on this call, in this roundtable, in this chamber community to drive and make a difference. And when we think about what are we doing to offer outreach and create paths for our trans colleagues, what are we doing to create a path where our bisexual colleagues are comfortable coming out and speaking to their sexual orientation in ways that have been typically taboo within our own community, What are we doing to create pathways for our colleagues, LGBTQ colleagues of color, who we know do not have the same privileges as some of their white counterparts? So it's thinking through with a critical lens, not only this panel, that's the easy part, but going back and looking at each of our leadership teams within our ERGs and what are the structures of development. I love that question earlier, and I think it's key. Any thoughts here to this this conversation that you'd like to add? Terry, let me go to you. We've not been to you for a moment.
That's great. I love what Bernadette said, and it resonates with me. And I think that what we're doing here is what we need to be doing. We need to be having these uncomfortable conversations, and we need to be listening and engaging. And we have to have an open mind and an open heart when we are engaging in these conversations, and we need to be very transparent. It kind of makes me relate back to being in the closet and not talking about something, or former military rules where the don't ask, don't tell. All that has to stop. We need to talk about what the issues are, bring them into the light, take them out of the dark, and make them more apparent if we're ever going to see change.
Thank you. Well said. Well said. And, you know, there is a focus on intersectionality around race. I'm also curious if there's anyone has any thoughts around intersectionality with your disability ERGs or BRGs, because that in our work, working with global companies and their EBRG structures, there can be some strong partnerships that are formed with your disability inclusion EBRGs and your LGBTQ BRGs. Andrew, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, and I was actually going to unmute to kind of speak up about this, because, you know, one thing a couple of years ago that we had that started was our accessibility BRG, focusing around, you know, mental well-being and, you know, psychological well-being. And I think that especially with this year, with COVID and everyone working from home and just the fatigue and everything happening specifically for our LGBT plus community, it was really co-leading and teaming up with them on having conversations and sessions around, you know, the kind of the mental wear down of being home and not being able to, you know, socially gather and have those kind of experiences, and really just trying to take a step to say, you know, it's okay to have this conversation and have this conversation at work. Whereas I think previous to 2020, I don't think we had that kind of comfortability, and I don't think people were really stepping up a lot. And, you know, specifically being the Pride leader here in Chicago, it was teaming up actually with our employee assistance program vendor, and actually having a counselor come in virtually, that is, and actually having sessions to begin to be able to facilitate that. Because I think we immediately knew that we're not the experts, that we can't treat nor cure any of those, you know, any of that conversation and whatnot, but we wanted to bring a professional in that could. And I think that kind of showed us kind of branching together as both BRGs and also kind of reaching out with people who are a part of that EAP program.
Great example again of intersectionality at play, and how, some of the focus within the LGBTQ community, we end up, when we broaden our view and reach out from an intersectionality standpoint, the opportunity we have to be leaders across our EBRG networks in that way, I think, is really, really important. And Roxanne makes a great point in chat here about something we're starting to use as well, being a pro-inclusionist as an example here, right? How are we pro-inclusion? It's really easier for some people to share what they stand against, but what do you stand for? And what are the behaviors that demonstrate that you stand for one another? I think it's a really, really important conversation. So 2020 for EBRG leaders has not been easy. I would argue that it's not been easy 2020 for a lot of us for a whole host of reasons. But you put EBRG leadership, now let that be front and center for us as this roundtable discussion in this breakout. What tips would you offer our audience? Either learnings, challenges that you're experiencing, things that are keeping you up at night as an EBRG leader or as a leader in the field, Bernadette, that we all need to be paying more attention to. What would you like the community to pay more attention to in the EBRG world now that we're kind of starting to round 2020 down a bit, going into Q4? Who'd like to start? Who'd like to start? What do you want folks to take away, either, and be aware of your challenges? What's on your mind? What are you trying to accomplish as you prepare for 2021?
I would say avoid analysis paralysis and just get into action. Do something, especially on your anti-racism journey and your pro-inclusion journey. Be in action, because there's inertia coming from inaction. And so, I talked about some specific things earlier. Robin has some great ideas in the chat as well. Something really simple that I did earlier this year is I just set up a monthly recurring donation to the Brave Space Alliance, which is an organization serving queer, Black, and brown people on the South Side of Chicago. And they do fantastic work. So you know what? There are things we can do, but you've got to do something and get in action.
Great, thank you. Terry, how about you, please? What comes to mind for you?
Instantly came to mind, I think we've laid the groundwork for our ERGs at Verizon. I would say probably last year, we didn't have partnerships that we do now with other ERGs. And I think that's laying the foundation for what is to come and for us to grow and, attack this intersectionality. We've had many partnerships with BOLD and WAVE. BOLD is our African-American group, WAVE is our women group. And we continue to do that and continue to partner in ways to drive change and awareness. So I think that's the groundwork, and I would just want to see that continue and grow into 2021 and see change from it. I think that we've done a lot of the preparation to get there, but I think that I'd like to see the actions that we're taking drive the change that we're looking for.
Thank you. So an action theme already in the first two responses. Sarah, if you would, please.
Yeah, I think it was Shelley in the chat that kind of referenced maybe our panel representation also is an indicator of what our corporate America or our employers look like in terms of diversity. And that's, I think, a big one for us at US Foods. And I say us collectively because, one of the big things is all of the leadership's teams across all ERGs at US Foods get together. And it's how do we move forward together and not just solely look at my own ERG. And one of that is diversity within the workplace, and specifically within our corporate offices, where I think it's probably overwhelmingly white, and then probably would go male next. So how do we push more on our corporate partners that it's their day-to-day job, whether it's in talent management, recruitment, all of those areas of the business, to say we want more and we as a company deserve more and should go after more, and shouldn't just be okay with settling with the best, who we think the best candidate is for a position, but challenge our mindset a bit more. And so luckily enough, our talent management team has really listened to us as a collective ERG group, not just PRIDE, and has now put in different things on how to combat everyday bias when you're interviewing, taking off, different aspects of an interview or receiving resumes, so you're not using that everyday bias when you're reviewing things and you're getting the best clients or potential employees. And then also working with different third-party recruiters and having the power and giving our hiring committee the power of saying, no, this isn't good enough, give me more, find somebody else. And so we've really started pushing on them a little bit more, a little pressure test to see, how much they're willing to, I think, not just speak the words, but walk the talk and show up exactly, the way that you're showing. And we're starting to see that kind of little by little. We just hired a vice president of diversity and inclusion, which was a first for our company. And she actually worked for the National Chamber of Commerce. So a lot of good work that's happening, but I think in terms of staying awake at night, it's not good enough yet. Can't rest yet. It needs to get better and better, and we need to keep seeing representation of all levels across the board.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Andrew, round us out, please.
Sure. Yeah, I think just to kind of build on everyone's point, I think a big thing that we've done is trying not to focus so much on just regional leadership in the BRG and ERG. So, right now we have Chicago, we have Houston, we have DC. Instead, I think it's kind of turning the tables and saying, 2020, we all got connected here. Let's keep that momentum going in the future. So get rid of that and start having more opportunities and more space for growth and development. And I can say this because I work in HR, but one thing that I think we were always pretty skittish on was, we used to only really focus on D&I, specifically for minorities within the US. And I think a huge thing that we're doing now is we actually just announced having a global D&I leader in this space. So we are taking a very proactive step to say, this is not just a problem within the Americas, it's a problem globally. And we need to have structured and aligned view as to how we approach and do those things. And I think as we continue to see momentum happen moving forward, we're going to see that hopefully progress.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank all of you for those insights. And I hope for those who are listening into the session, as imperfect as the conversation may be, what I hope we take away from this is, in the last hour, a willingness to lean in and do the hard work and confront the hard work that lies ahead on this topic of intersectionality, in particular, the intersectionality between the LGBTQ community and the added intersectional dimension of race and ethnicity, because it's one that has profound impact on our lived experiences. So I hope that you saw a willingness and a demonstration of an openness to have the dialogue. And with that, I just have to say thank you to the panelists for being brave and leaning into that conversation, and for those of you who were active in chat and challenging the very things that should be challenged and raising those questions. Hats off and kudos to everyone. So thank you for that. Roxanne, I think we go to you to close. We are looking forward to the next session, where we're going to roll up our sleeves and put you all to work, give some opportunity to do some think tank work together in breakout rooms on some of these very, very issues, And by expanding the conversation from the Zoom platform, 5 of us as talking tiles, putting you to work and giving you a platform to be able to share and network with one another about the challenges and good ideas that you all have. So we hope that you'll join for the next session as well. So Roxanne.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you to all the panelists again. I'm actually going to flip it over to Matt now to close it out.
All right.
Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I am Matt Phillips. I'm the board president for the LGBT Chamber of Commerce of Illinois. And a huge thank you to Scott and our panelists. This is all part of our journey to form a more perfect chamber. And I appreciate you all doing your part to keep us rolling in the right direction. I actually have exciting news to share with all of you today. It's the first time we're making this announcement. So I'm happy to have you here to join us for this. So every year we host our annual winter soiree. This year it will be taking place virtually on December 1st. Some more information to come on that. But it's our time to commemorate the year, gather together and celebrate the work of our members, corporate partners, and community stakeholders. And just 2 nights ago, our board of directors gathered to select our winners for our awards this year. So I'm very proud to announce that Scott Hoesman of inQuest Consulting is our 2020 Small Business of the Year award winner. So congratulations, Scott. Thank you for all that you do to keep our chamber expanding with our outreach, our impact on corporate partners. You've been pivotal in helping us sort of jumpstart this next chapter for the organization. So thank you, and we look forward to celebrating this achievement with you.
It takes a lot to surprise me, Matt, and you have caught me completely off guard. I'm humbled by that recognition and honor, and my commitment back is to take the essence of this last hour of conversation and double our efforts as a firm to address some of these issues. We're already doing a lot, and I'm committed to doing even more to help the chamber in that regard. So thank you. Very, very exciting.
Well deserved.
Thank you. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in the next session.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. Andrew.
Thank you.
Sarah, Terry, Bernadette, thank you so much.